This will be a very short movie because we've covered most of this in class, but it's a very important one because it's how do you respond to the reviews after you get them back. Now, first of all, will the paper be reviewed at all? Now, we talked very much about checking to make sure your paper fit the scope and the topic of that journal. Now, sometimes we make a misjudgment there. And so don't let it hurt your feelings if the editor sends the paper back and says, this isn't a good match for our journal. They simply mean that that's not the kind of article they publish in their journal. It says nothing about the quality of your submission. In fact, they probably didn't read it at all. So not appropriate for this journal is not a bad thing. It just means you need to look at another journal. And it's good to know that right up front so you can get after it and get something done about the other journal. That decision you should get right away. If you don't hear from them right away, it probably means you're not going to get that decision. If you do, just move on and choose another journal. Now, if you don't hear anything from the editor, keep checking. First of all, most journals these days have an online progress. When you submit something, you probably get an email back that says your journal has been received. You can go to this website, enter this data, and check where we are in the process. If it doesn't do that, then it's okay if you don't hear in a couple of weeks. Send an email to the editor and say, I wondered if my paper was was in review. Apply to inquiry, but it's their job to let you know what's happening. And so if you don't hear within a couple of weeks, it's okay to say, I'm concerned. I wanted to make sure you got my paper. Could you let me know if it's in review? If you have special circumstances, you might mention it. It might make a difference and it might not. For example, if you are coming up for promotion and tenure at the end of the semester, you might say, I would very much appreciate knowing whether my paper is in review, because if it's not, I need to submit it to another journal because I am coming up for promotion and tenure. This is academia. They understand that. It may make a difference, it may not, but it doesn't hurt to ask. You should have several papers in review at the same time. Why? Because sometimes it takes a long time. So the minute you send a paper off, start working on another one. Send it off as fast as you can. So you should have papers in different levels of being reviewed, and it's helpful to keep up with that instead of thinking, oh, when did I send that paper to that journal? Was it before this paper or after this paper? Keep a journal and say, I sent it on this day. I heard from the editor on this day that said it was in review. Or I haven't heard, but I sent an email on this day. It's very important to keep up with where your papers are. Now, what can happen after you send them in? First of all, you can get a note back that says we've accepted your paper and it's going to be published. That is fantastic, but it's kind of like winning the lottery. It can happen, but it doesn't happen very often. I know people with extensive academic careers who have never had a paper accepted on the first submission. It just doesn't happen very often. Probably the best, most positive response you can get is revise and resubmit. What that means is they're seriously considering your paper. They sent it out to review. They got the feedback back. Now, if they weren't seriously interested, they wouldn't have done that because it takes a long time to review a paper and it's a lot of trouble. So that means that they're interested. Read the letter carefully. If there's something you don't understand, ask. Now, sometimes you get a rejection, but it says the journal is open to resubmission. What does that mean? They reject it, but they want it back? It means that as it is, the paper is not appropriate for the journal. But there's hope for it. Uh, but they want you to do a lot of rewriting. Now, if you're going to do that, you need to do it as quickly as possible. They usually give you like 90 days. Try to do it in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, because if they're interested now. They may change their mind down the road. Respond exactly to the request for revision. Even if you disagree, they're in charge. So you need, when you resubmit, to let them know that you read every single review and thoughtfully addressed it in your resubmission. Okay, so in your review and resubmit, before you get started, take a few days off. Why is that? Usually when you get that letter, you read it and you think, they didn't understand me at all. They didn't read me carefully. I disagree. You're angry, you're hurt. So just set it aside for a few days. Go walk, have an evening at the movies, relax before you get back to it. Look for the positive things they said. I'm sure there were some very good things about your paper. Look for them. Sit down and have a peer go over the reviews and say, what do you think about these? And maybe they have some good points to give you. Now, when you start revising, keep track of the changes. The editor's going to require that. You're going to have to say in paragraph 6, the reviewer objected to my tone. I have rewritten that to be more positive in tone. You are going to have to know exactly how you change things. So if you need to do several versions, keep the different versions and entitle them differently. Now, when you resubmit, you've got to send a letter, and you are convincing them in this letter that you took those comments seriously and you revised exactly as they ask you to. Okay, so you get the reviews back and the reviewers disagree. This happens frequently. They're just people, and they all have their own perspectives. What do? Carefully read each of them. I get criticized a lot. I mean, that's what you do in a profession when you're a professional. I've rarely gotten any criticism that wasn't of value. There's something in that criticism, something in that feedback that is of value to you. Now, of course, if 2 of them say they love this passage and 3 says they didn't like it, think about the majority. When you respond to the editor, say that. Say, since 2 of my reviewers really like this passage, I left it in there. And just use your judgment. What if the reviewer is simply wrong? You know the theory, and the reviewer is saying something that doesn't fit. Maybe you misled them. Maybe the way you wrote it was not clear. Or if they simply were reading old theory, or they didn't know the theory well, when you send that letter, say, I question whether the editor, whether the reviewer is familiar with the theories of so and so, so and so, and so and so, which clearly state what you put in your paper. You might even send a confidential note to the editor. I think I've told you before that I sent a paper in for revision, for publication, and I got some really nasty quotes from the editor, from one of the reviewers, and I knew who he was. He and I had been at a conference together, and we disagreed on how to interpret a theory. And I knew who he was, and I knew he was prejudiced against my paper. And I very confidentially dropped a note to the editor and say, I have a long history. I am guessing that this was reviewed by so-and-so and so-and-so. I have a long history with this person. perhaps that is coloring the way he reviewed my paper because he was familiar with my paper before I submitted it. Okay, what if you just get rejected? We don't want it. Not review and resubmit, just we don't want it. Stay positive. Just because they don't want it doesn't mean it's not good. Read the reviews carefully, and again, if they're valid, fix it. And then select another journal that may be more appropriate. Make the changes they suggest if they're reasonable. But keep the paper moving. Get it back into circulation as soon as you can. Just keep trying. Here's some references you might want to check. And keep me posted because I know I'm going to see your name in some very good publications.